Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of PropTech Talks, where we talk with different PropTech executives, real estate executives, investors, entrepreneurs. Today, we have Melanie Leech, the CEO of the British Property Federation. Melanie, great to have you.
Thank you. Really good to be here, Matthew.
Cool. Well, let's jump into it. So I think you've got quite an interesting and unique journey to where you are today. Can you tell us about it? Tell us how the Melanie journey started.
Well, I think what you're saying very politely is there is no plan or apparent coherence to my working life journey. And I guess that's because I've actually just done things that have motivated me or that I've wanted to do. So I have, I think, quite a strong public service ethic. So when I left university, having studied maths, I knew I didn't want to be an accountant. No disrespect to the accounting profession, which is a great profession, but I didn't want to do that. I've been quite active, quite sporty at school, so I wanted something that would be similarly active. So I joined the police force, and I served as a police officer in London for 4 years, and then for a variety of reasons decided that that wasn't going to be the long-term career for me. So I left the police but joined the civil service, and I had a fantastic career over a number of years in the civil service, doing lots of different roles, following what I thought was interesting. Then ultimately came back into the civil service, having done some secondments just after the birth of my second child. So I had 2 small children, and at that time thought the life of a senior civil servant, which was long before we all worked remotely or had even the tech, the basic tech that we take for granted today, was much more needing to be present, long hours in the office, and I didn't want that life, as I say, with a young family. So I left the civil service and joined the Food and Drink Federation, which is a trade association for the food and drink sector. So still working on public policy, but just representing a different stakeholder point of view, and did that for almost 10 years. And then got approached to join the British Property Federation, so similar role, just in a different sector in property, and moved a decade ago. So I've just finished 10 years at the British Property Federation.
Amazing. And so I'd like to go into just a couple pieces there that I personally think are really cool. So the police, I mean, that must have even been just such a unique component of your career in itself. How do you think that's actually shaped you as a person? Has it shaped you as a person? Has it helped you as a leader? What are your thoughts there?
I think it absolutely did. I mean, I think I made the right decision to leave after 4 years, but I wouldn't have missed those 4 years at all. So many good memories and experiences alongside some of the tougher times. I suppose, what being in that kind of sort of very public-facing role with the public, in extremis quite often when, whatever their challenges might be, it teaches you a lot about empathy, I think. It teaches you a lot about being able to read people and situations. It teaches you a lot about negotiation and navigating through complex situations, where you might nominally have the power because you've got the uniform and you've got the authority being a police constable. But as a young woman in central London, you're not actually got much power in some of those situations. So I think it taught me a whole load of people skills and maybe some resilience that have stood me in very good stead throughout my career.
Really cool. And I think that's something we're probably going to go into a little bit later, especially when we're thinking about government coordination, working with different stakeholders, thinking about empathy and also resilience as a combination. That's something to talk about soon. One thing that happened recently, just to jump ahead actually, is the recent merger with the UK PropTech Association. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Sure. So UK PropTech Association is quite a young company. It only started, I think, 6 or 7 years ago. And from the start, we'd worked quite closely with them, built really good relationships. But I guess probably 2.5 years ago now. So the merger happened in October 2023. So, for the year or so before that, I think we'd increasingly, as we explored how we could collaborate more closely together for the benefit of both the PropTech and the property communities, we'd increasingly come to the view that what we needed was to bring us completely together, partly because that was a very strong signal about how each of us felt about the integrated nature and the way that PropTech needed to be integrated into the thinking of the property sector, and partly because we could see that we would have more impact that way. So it was good for both sectors, but I think it was also good for what both of those sectors wanted to achieve in terms of relationship with wider stakeholders, including government, the media, investors, and so on. So it felt like a very natural thing together to do, to come together fully.
And this almost feels like it was the right thing to do, even on a business decision. Is that a lot of how the BPF operates? It's really thinking what actually is best for real estate on the whole in the country, and then can we make this work from a business side? Is that do you think a fair way to assess that?
I think it is. I think it's certainly the way I come at leading the BPF is to say, what is in the best interest of the industry? And I think my public sector background helps there, because I firmly believe that it's just as important to be challenging the industry and supporting the industry to be a better industry and deliver more benefit, to its wider stakeholders and to local communities, as it is to represent their interests effectively to government. It's a virtuous circle, if you like, because I can't be credible as a partner to government if I'm not representing an industry that behaves as if it wants to be a responsible partner to government. So the two things very much go hand in hand, I think. But it has to start with, what's the best thing for the industry in order to allow it to deliver the best outcomes.
Amazing. And so now looking a little bit at the BPF's current initiatives, something that's quite powerful is the Building Our Future manifesto. So, thinking about building for productivity and growth. Now, a lot of maybe developers, asset managers, and even on the PropTech side, we've gone through a period. Well, first they'd gotten used to a period of very low interest rates, and where growth was, maybe easy is not the right word, but it was definitely easier. Then there were a few blows: pandemic, supply chain issue, and interest rates increase all together. And now there still is a sense of optimism, and even this way of thinking, building for productivity and growth. What would your message be, I suppose, to developers, the tech companies who are now creating building for a future? What would be your advice there with respect to this manifesto?
Yeah. So we published that just over a year ago, so well ahead of the general election, although that came rather quicker, I think, than anyone was expecting. And really what we wanted to do was make it really clear and simple for an incoming government to understand where property and PropTech sit, in terms of what should be their priorities, who was going to help partner them to deliver. And you're right, we had 4 pillars in that. So building for growth, building more homes, building stronger town centres, and building the green economy. And I suppose the underlying message is, you can't do any of those things. You can't deliver economic growth. You can't build more homes, self-evidently. You can't regenerate town centres. You can't create a new green economy without putting buildings and the built environment at the heart of that. Because, most working life takes place in buildings, whether that's offices or whether that's shops or restaurants, or whether that's life science labs or factories or manufacturing. You can't, it all happens in buildings. Your homes are buildings. So if you start from there, we are the infrastructure, if you like, that delivers all of those benefits. So that was the message, I suppose, to our stakeholders and to government ahead of the election. And my message, sort of back to my stakeholders in the industries of property and PropTech is, the good news is, I think, that since the election, the government is listening to that message and understands that. I'm really encouraged by how quickly the Labour government moved on, what we told them were the biggest blockers, particularly in the planning system, but now also in some of the statutory consultees that sit alongside the planning system. I'm really pleased by how I think the government's responded and heard that message. So I'm quite excited that real estate is at the heart of policy thinking, in the way it probably hasn't been for quite a long time. And I also think, we've had really productive relationship with Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government around PropTech. I think there's a good level of understanding about what a jewel in the crown UK PropTech is and how much bigger that could be. So we recently launched a report which they commissioned, looking at the future of PropTech, sort of trying to be a sort of, I suppose, a resetting of our understanding of the PropTech sector, where it is now, what the potential is, what the barriers are to growth and so on. And that's intended to be the first step in a series of joint working we're going to do with government over the next year or so, really to try and help the PropTech sector, and help investors understand it, help the sector to grow and thrive, and open up, even more the opportunities for engagement between the property sector and the PropTech sector, which was at the heart of the merger. Really, was trying to bring the two sides together to have a more productive conversation.
Amazing. And let's look at one of the components here with a little bit more detail, which is the sustainability and building the green economy. So supporting net zero initiatives. Now, a lot of countries, not just the UK, have, of course, net zero goals, and a lot of both government side, but then also LPs and investors also having net zero goals. But at the same time, every building is different. It's not necessarily a quick plug a technology company and let's solve this. How should, at a high level, how should governments and different developer and property stakeholders start to approach this productively?
So I think government's role is to set the framework, because you're right, every developer, if it's a new building, or every asset owner, if they're facing a retrofit challenge, has to approach that challenge according to the unique nature of the building or buildings that they are, creating or owning and managing. But they have to have a clear framework within which to take the decisions they're going to need to take. So they need to know, where they need to get to and by when. They need to know, in terms of the infrastructure that will support their net zero journey, and of course the national grid being the critical part of that for many, that's going to be able to deliver what it needs to. Because you can't create a net zero building in operation if the energy that's coming from the grid isn't clean energy, for example. So I think, government's job is to look after the infrastructure, the sort of the national assets part of it. I think it's then to create a clear policy, long-term stable policy framework, so everybody understands the rules of the game and can then play their part within it. And then the final bit is, I think, there need to be incentives, for everybody from large-scale commercial asset owners through to those of us who are lucky enough to own our own homes, because that's something that those who have the means to do may prioritise and say, this is the right thing to do, I should do it. But not everybody has that by a long stretch, and a lot of people don't live in their own homes. So I think it's really about how do you create the infrastructure, the policy framework, and the incentives for those for whom otherwise this just isn't going to be a viable decision.
And so listening to that, I mean, it really sounds like this is a case of very deep collaboration, because for the structure and the platform to be in place that the government set out, that they really need to understand it from the developer's point of view, but then for the developer to act in a way that actually delivers on something that is beneficial to the country, not necessarily what the sole business objective. I know some developers are really good at that. Some developers are actually less so. How does that deep collaboration, really happen? How can we make that happen?
I think it's at a number of levels. So there's a level which is about national government, listening to stakeholders and understanding the issues and taking the decisions only it can take. And for example, I think one of the biggest issues for us thinking about the role we could be playing in building the green economy is the amount of surplus clean energy we could be generating and passing back to the grid. Because if you think of all the roofs on top of logistics facilities, warehouses, et cetera, I think that could be generating up to 20-25% of the UK's energy requirements if it was possible to connect that energy to feeds back into the grid, and if there was a tariff price that made that an economically viable investment for those businesses. So there's a huge opportunity there. So that's sort of at national level. Then I think this is going to be increasingly important at regional and local level, because part of the answer to decarbonising has to be thinking in terms of neighbourhoods, in terms of towns and so on. So development of heat networks, development of local networks, that are off grid but are self-sustaining. And those don't happen by one building or one asset owner, or even someone, like the owner of King's Cross, the estate. They happen by bringing together local authorities with local people, with local asset owners, with tenants. So a lot of this is about tenants as well within buildings. They may not be the owners of the buildings, but the way they use buildings when they're tenanting them will be critical to how building performs in practice. So I think, and that's a really exciting journey. I think that a number of parts of the country are already on, and so the work that some people like the Connected Places Catapult are doing is really important. I think in gathering together those learnings and enabling pilots to happen that just help us to understand how we could do this. And of course, the UK is not doing this in isolation. There's fantastic practice across the world as well in these kind of areas and this kind of thinking. So I think deep collaboration is critical actually, and it's important not to get too siloed, I guess.
And when thinking about the future, a large a large next step, a crucial next step, is thinking about the younger professional network. There seems to be sort of out of nowhere a lot more young entrepreneurs. I sort of even went into this with PropTech Connect, even wondering, am I sort of too young? I'm going to do it, but am I too young to do this? And then that same year, there was Hyber with Hannah, there was Kestrix, there were all sorts of young entrepreneurs making a really impactful difference. And I know that the BPF has the established BPF Futures. What would be your advice to young professionals who do want to make a difference and continue to drive real estate forward within the country and within whatever they're doing?
Yeah. Well, obviously, I'd say join BPF Futures because it's free to join, and anyone can join whether or not their company is a BPF member. Far be it from me, from my vast age, to give young professionals advice. I mean, I guess what I'd say is, firstly, this is a fantastic place. Whether you're in tech or whether you're in property, it's a fantastic industry to work in. And it's, a bit old-fashioned, but it's changing quite fast. And, young professionals coming in with fantastic energy, diversity of thought, they are the people who will drive that change more quickly. So I would say, don't be afraid to challenge, want to have a voice, find the mentors, the allies, who can make sure you have a bit of protection around that when you need it. But I would say absolutely, don't be afraid to have a voice. And we've worked really hard at the BPF, I think, to make sure that younger professionals have a voice within everything we do. So, we always look to, in our major events, to include a strong BPF Futures voice across our policy work. We increasingly, I think, have BPF Futures representation on most of our committees. The chair of the BPF Futures Advisory Board, which runs BPF Futures with support from my team, sits on our main board. So we think it's really important. And we're also working at the moment on ideas to try and bring a collaboration of different groupings of young professional voices together to be an advocate for the sector, to government and with our stakeholders more widely. Because I think, a lot of the issues that government considers from a policy perspective, a lot of the things we're thinking about, they are the stakeholders. If you're talking about town centres, or you're talking about, building more homes and what kind of homes we want and what kind of, communities we want, then someone who's 40 years younger than I am, by definition, has a lot more skin in the game than I do, without getting too morbid about it. So it's absolutely right that we hear young professionals' voices. And actually, what's great is, talking about the industry being quite old-fashioned, which it undoubtedly is, and quite slow to change because it hasn't needed to. We need the disruptors. I'm not saying that older people can't be disruptors, and I'm not saying that every young professional is a disruptor, but bringing in a much broader set of perspectives, much more challenge, much more energy and insight around, what the future looks like from people who have a real stake in the future is really important, I think.
And an interesting point you've made there, I think, on two things. The first, the industry hasn't really needed to change previously. Pre-pandemic, real estate was sort of a game of, buying commercial space. The lease is going to last for 15 to 25 years. Sort of leave them to it, kind of thing. And it's changing quickly. At the same time, sustainability having more of an effect on asset value, more of an effect from more of a desire from the government, data being more important, because assets are behaving differently than they used to, so they are more nuanced. Given all of that, and there's a lot more driver for change, and there's a lot more reason to change, do you see from the, let's say, the more traditional real estate side, do you see increased appetite for change? What does that actually look like in practice with the different developers, with respect to all of that?
I think it's easy to talk about the real estate industry as if it was kind of a homogeneous thing,
Yeah.
and it really isn't. So at one end of the spectrum, I think you've got large scale businesses, whether they are in public markets, REITs and so on, or whether they're private markets, the institutions, private equity and so on, who had the ability and the resource and capability to think about these things. And I see lots of evidence in my membership and across the sector that is happening at pace. They want to employ very different people, not just chartered surveyors, and that's not chartered surveyors or specialist planners or whatever it is. They want people who know all about customer insights. They want people who know about change management, about tech, about data, about AI.
That's right.
It's a very different profile of the skills set that's needed to work in a modern real estate company at that end of the spectrum. But then you've got at the other end of the spectrum, you've got small owners, who are struggling, on the edge of, what's possible to do to invest in their portfolio or to really make meaningful differences, and no headspace or resource to think about it. So I think it's it's very much a kind of divergence of ability to think about these things and to respond to them, which is why both regulation and incentives and support are important, because we're going to take everybody on the journey. You have to face the fact that not everybody can invest in the way that some company like British Land in my membership or LNG and funds will be able to do. People don't just have that capacity. So how do we help them and make it possible for them also to come on the journey?
And so it's interesting though that the larger organizations seem to be leading the way, which from listening, very positive. I didn't know that even the way they're structuring their organization is with the future in mind. So over the next, 10, 20 years, what do you think? I know it's a very broad question, but what do you think that future actually will be looking like? Are we going to be seeing, do you think, an increase in sustainability? Do you think, how do you think we'll be doing in terms of building more homes? And also, what's sort of next for the BPS? I know there's sort of two questions there, but what with mind to that, what would be next for the BPS?
Yeah. And I should say, to your last comment on what I said, there are lots of small businesses, lots of great entrepreneurs coming into property,
Definitely,
who don't come in with all of the baggage
definitely.
of how we've always done things. So I don't at all want to suggest there won't be innovation, in the SME part, because I think that you're right. That's where innovation generally comes from. And I think if you don't come in sort of knowing for the last 100 years this is how we built a building, you come in with, I want to make a difference. I want what's available to me. So I think it's as the market brings more product that helps you solve challenges, then you'd expect the SME end, the entrepreneurial end of the spectrum, to just start in a different place, if you like.
Which actually works really well.
Yeah.
Which actually works really well.
So what's next with the BPF? Well, I guess we're trying to showcase to government what the future could look like if it works effectively in that kind of deep collaboration across all areas that we touched on earlier on. And that could look like us getting close. I think 1.5 million homes by 2029 is pretty ambitious, but the objective is actually to make a step change in the delivery of homes of all tenures, and to sustain that over a long period of time. And I think that is absolutely achievable. And I think the government's very clearly set its mind to how it's going to do that. And for us, we don't represent the house builders for sale, but we represent the rental part of the market. So for us, that looks like growing the build-to-rent sector significantly. So I think we delivered 18,000 build-to-rent homes to market last year. We think you could get to 30,000. Some of my members think you could get to 50, 60,000. So build-to-rent, a professionalised private rental sector could be a very significant contributor towards the homes target, as could all the amount of institutional capital coming into affordable and social housing, where we really need to drive a difference. And we think, there are things the government could do, which involve spending money on their part. So it remains to be seen whether or not they can prioritise that could deliver 100,000 plus affordable homes a year into market over time. So I think, and then if you think about town centres, there's lots that could be done to really kind of try and get behind reinvigorating town centres. We talked about the green economy a bit.
Can we go into that in a bit more detail, actually, because that's an interesting part. So at face value, it's sort of upgrading town centres and sort of bringing them back. What's the thinking there, and why is that valuable?
So I think I start from the proposition that there's no blueprint that says X town centre should look like this, because it has to be locally driven. It has to start with the local authority leading a conversation with local stakeholders about what do we want this town centre to look like. And the last government introduced a concept called High Street Accelerators, which gave a little bit of money for local authorities to be able to create that conversation, which I think is a great starting point. We argued, and we're disappointed they didn't go further and pick up our model on this, for something more significant called town centre investment zones. And really what that means is you kind of throw a ring, the local authority throws a ring around the area it wants to focus on. And within that, you kind of throw every lever you've got at your disposal into the pot. So that might be something around business rates retention, that could be around using CPO powers, that could be that there are financial incentives needed to attract businesses back into that place. It could be there's funding needed to create community assets. It would be very bespoke to the area, but driven by local people and actually the local assessment of what is realistic to try and achieve. Because if you've got no real employment in the town centre and you've got no good transport that allows people easily to commute into the centre, it's probably not going to turn into a data centre hub or an AI hub or whatever. You've got to be realistic about what it could be, and you've got to look forward, not back.
Right.
But that was the concept we had, and as I say, it has to be locally driven. And there are lots of our members here, particularly in the retail sector, which is shrinking but still vibrant. In its core, a lot of them own a lot of the assets on these high streets. Some of them will need repurposing. Some of them will be, the vibrant shopping hubs of the future. But we do see that it will be much more varied use. There will be people living on our high streets. There will be doctor's surgery, community hubs, all these kind of things. But it takes a lot of hard work, I think, even to have the conversation, let alone to figure out how you create the asset base and the investment base that then enables you to put that into practice.
And it seems to be almost a self-fulfilling cycle in that when you start to, we're talking about business rates, when we start to retain good businesses that are training talented people, then more people want to be there, and then the businesses will grow. So it's an interesting step that's going to allow these town centres to flourish and come with a cascade of positive effects. My thinking is, and also at the same time, many cities are doing it very well. So I recently was in Dubai, and I couldn't believe even the shopping centres and the malls and the infrastructure that they had, and everybody's it's a very car city.
Yeah.
But everybody in many of these sort of hubs they're all walking around. So it's possible.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they're attracting a lot of business and retaining a lot of business over there as well. Do you think the town centre initiative, it potentially doesn't get enough attention and almost love from even the technology side? And do you think that there's an opportunity there?
Potentially. I think, at a number of levels, I guess. I mean, there's an opportunity, and we touched on it earlier on in terms of things like heat networks and local networks for energy and so on. I think if you can get, once you build that coalition of the willing, if you like, because the other part of it has to be, you have to say to anyone who's an asset owner or, an actor within that zone, if you don't want to be part of this, if you don't accept that you have to contribute over and above looking after your own little interest, then leave. You can't.
Interesting.
And that's where I think the local authority might need the powers to be able to buy someone out and say, it's fine, it will give you a fair price, but you walk away, because the condition of staying as part of this is, you have to contribute to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts.
And it benefits them.
Yes, and it will benefit, exactly, and it will benefit them. So once you've got that coalition of the willing, then I think all things become possible. And, it may be that tech is part of driving that, or it may be that tech is part of the solutions provider to that coalition, if you like. So I think, in a number of different ways, it could be and should be fundamental. And I guess the other part of that is, that tech folk are good at kind of thinking off the wall and thinking differently about things, and sweeping generalization. But I think that's true. It's just a different kind of approach and mindset to finding answers to challenges or creating opportunities. And I think that's a perspective that would add real value in a lot of these conversations.
I actually definitely think if you do get these retail owners and these landlords, and there are sort of a list of nagging things that they should be doing that they might not want to be doing, whenever there's that sort of situation, a technology company thinks, well, I can make that very easy for you, and push a lot of buttons. The last thing to look at here is the international property investment collaboration. The UK's position sort of globally and in Europe. A lot of change in the world very recently, and it seems to be changing very quickly at the moment. So, but I still think that this is the UK sort of position globally, and investment. The direction of investment, around Europe and around the world. Where do you think it's going, and what might the UK, given everything we've talked about, what might the UK need to do to sort of strengthen its position?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can only speak for property and tech, and I think we're all kind of waiting to see how the Trump administration, for example, pans out in practice. We're waiting to see, what it feels like. If you zoom right out, there's a lot of change going on globally at the moment.
It feels like everybody's sort of on the edge of their seat for something in a movie.
Yeah, it's a bit like that maybe. And I think, I think the sands are shifting, and I don't know where that will end up. But in terms of property and PropTech, the UK has always been a magnet for global investment into real estate. And that's because, we're very transparent as a market, the rule of law, stable politics, broadly. And, we've had a few bumps along the way and that in the last few years. But broadly, I think those things remain true. And I think, this government is working hard to, make sure that remains the case. So I would expect, that global capital, which has choices to make, would continue to want to come to the UK. So I think it's ours to lose rather than, ours to work hard to sort of redirect from other places. I think, we're a natural choice for quite a lot of the globe. It's language, time, all those things.
Yeah.
And all the data shows that we are still attracting significant amounts of capital, and we're still a destination of choice. And that's sort of historically been generally London. That is changing slowly. I think you can, particularly the hubs like Manchester and Birmingham, something you can see that changing, and particularly the long-term patient capital, I think is keen to be part of the infrastructure story, keen to be part of the regeneration story. So I think that's all very positive. And on the tech side, I think we are one of the best places to be a PropTech business in the world. And it's up to us
Very true.
shout that story, tell that story, working in partnership with government, and make sure that, A, that stays true, but B, we kind of get the benefits of that, both in terms of attracting more capital and more investment into the UK, but also translating that into delivering beneficial outcomes to the UK property market.
And it is moving positively in that a lot of these tech businesses are growing. They are attracting capital. They are attracting great people. We're still, incredibly international city. Even I'm just thinking about our own office. How many of us are actually British? I don't even know, but maybe 30%. This is the final question, I promise. What would be your advice to let's say, the more traditional property side going forwards?
I think be willing to be challenged, embrace change, and join the British Property Federation.
Fantastic. Melanie, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for participating.
Thank you very much, Matthew.